Hey guys, this is Cast for Closers, your podcast for dominating inside sales and hitting your quota. Today we're going to talk a lot about SaaS and inside sales challenges, and we are very proud to have someone who has mastered both. Our guest today is Mr. Jason Lemkin. Jason is the founder of EchoSign, acquired by Adobe in 2011. Jason is also the head and the voice behind SaaStr's blog, and he defines himself as a SaaS founder, enthusiast, and investor. Jason also wrote, in partnership with Aaron Ross, the book From Impossible to Inevitable, translated here in Portuguese for Hipercrescimento, already available here in Brazil. Jason, welcome to the show. We are very excited about this episode. We've been reading SaaStr's blog since 2014, I think. So welcome. Feel free to spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself and your past and what you think is relevant, okay?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. About a little more than 5 years ago, I accidentally started this SaaStr community, starting with a blog on Quora after I sold my last startup to Adobe. And I'd sold just as we hit $1 million a month in revenue, or 12 million a year, and the business just kept growing and growing and growing. But I'd sold, so I had the opportunity to share my honest mistakes and learnings without having to pretend, hedge, lie, exaggerate. And back in 2012, when I started doing this, there were only, a couple folks like me, at least it seemed like it. 5 years later, I think the SaaS community is 100 times larger, and wow. There's far more successful founders than me sharing their learnings and mistakes. But the community has sort of grown, and we'll have 10,000 folks at the SaaStr Annual in February. We get about 3 million views a month on their content. I've raised about 90 million to further invest in SaaS companies. I've done a bunch of good ones, and we're having a lot of fun. And the real goal of SaaStr is just to help other SaaS executives and founders to scale faster and just make less of the same mistakes that we all make.
Yeah, the thing I love most about the articles is that they seem very, very honest, like someone who has been through the path and showing others how it's difficult or how it's easy or how should it be in your perspective.
Yes, yeah. Everyone is, I think if nothing else, it's authentic.
Yeah, it's very, very honest. And Jason, jump into the questions. For me, one of the best and most famous blog posts you wrote on SaaStr's blog is the one you talk about getting from initial traction to initial scale, like 1 or 2 million ARR to 10 million ARR.
Yes.
So, and there are a lot of SaaS companies in our audience who have passed that 10 customer threshold, that initial threshold, and the 1 million ARR barrier, but have not got into the 10 million ARR. So can you comment a little bit more about this phase, especially from the inside sales perspective, and how should it look like?
Yeah, well, let's step back from it. I think that I've found that that's actually it's not the hardest phase, but it's the most challenging phase for SaaS startups. The early days, you're just hacking it. However, everyone has a different story about how they got their first 10 customers. They're not the same, right? Everyone has a different story. Some folks are hustlers. Some folks are good at PR. Some folks are good at content marketing. Some folks are good at business development. Some folks are good at working their personal networks. Who knows? There's 100 stories and 100 startups' first 10 customers. But then once you cross about 1 million, at similar price points, at similar ACVs, the stories start to converge. And it's hard at 1 million. You don't have enough people. You don't have enough money, right? But you finally kind of, at least you know where the next meal is coming from after 1 million. You know how to close. If you've got 100 customers, you know how to close the 101st or the 102nd. Unless you're Slack, no one's growing fast enough to make them happy, right?
Yeah.
But at least you know how to do it. And so around 1 million, you've kind of at least stabilized the ship. But really, and then I'll get to your detailed question, the really hard part for most folks is somewhere between 3, 4, 5, and 6 million. Because all of a sudden you realize you don't have any redundancy, you don't have remotely enough people around, and everything comes crashing down on you. You have too many feature gaps. You can't keep up, right? You don't have enough sales reps. You don't have enough of anything. And at 1 million, if Google comes in and says, if you build this feature for me, I'll sign a big contract, you just do it, right?
Yeah, right.
But when you have 10 of those, you can't do all of them. It all starts crashing down on you. So the real key is if by 3, 4, 5 million, if after you cross $1 million and you look out on the horizon, your next threshold, you've got to hire at least one great VP on your team. You can't have no VPs. And if we're going to talk about sales, it would be great to have a VP of sales or at least a VP of marketing, demand gen, right? But really any of the VPs, like even if you don't know what you're doing in sales, what if you have a great VP of engineering you add to your team? At least she or he can fix those feature gaps, right? At least when the sales team brings in a crazy idea from a prospect, if you have a better engineering lead, you can at least build the product. Or if you have a great head of product, she or he can at least get those customer features out faster, right? So it'd be great to hire your perfect VP of sales at $1 million in revenue, but my Zen learning over the years is just hire any of the VPs at $1 million, and your life will get easier.
Yeah, sure. And the biggest advice in this article that you gave has something with your answer right now, that is to not make a bad VP hire in this phase. One of the biggest challenges here, Jason, in Brazil, is that most of the sales VPs we talk are first-timers. And
There's no bench. There's no repeat founders. There's no repeat VPs. It's impossible to find folks that have done it before, right?
Yeah, it's so hard. So if you were here in Brazil as a CEO, how would you handle a first VP through this phase?
Well, let's step back for a minute. Yeah. So if you're in Brazil, you're not going to be able to lure a director of sales out of Box or Twilio or New Relic or HubSpot to come join you, right? Except in the off chance they're Brazilian and want to go home. That does happen. Right? Yes. It actually, let's step back for a minute, in all seriousness, and then let's talk about how to handle it. It's not Brazil, but I've interviewed most of the SaaS unicorns in Utah here in the States. Yes. Ryan Smith from Qualtrics and lots of others, Josh Smith from Domo. And I'll tell you what they're really good at. They're really good at identifying talent in California and New York and other places that has family history in Utah and luring them back. And the handful of Brazilian startups I've gotten to know, some of whom we work out of our co-selling space, we have 15,000 square feet in SF for folks that are here in SF part-time. Many of the handful of Brazilian and South American folks I've gotten to know, they identify folks with roots and they can convince some folks to go back, if not forever, for a year or two. Right? So did the European startups I've worked with. So don't discount that, right? There's no way a standard American that graduated from Stanford and has never been to Brazil is going to move to your startup in Brazil. It ain't going to happen, right? But don't forget about all the folks that went from Brazil to Stanford. You can get them and hone in like a heat-seeking missile. And, especially VPs of sales, they don't join you in a day. It takes a long time. They probably already have a good gig, right? Yeah. So budget 6 to 12 months to find your perfect VP of sales and start early. And focus like a heat-seeking missile on someone you can lure back. So that's point number one. Okay, point number two. Okay, what do you do when you don't have the veterans? Well, here's my learning. You have two choices for your sales leader, and you can try both experiments. But one is to hire the best individual contributor you can find, right, with no real management experience, and hope that she can build a team. Yeah. Right? That's one way to do it. There's a different approach, which sounds riskier, but I actually think it's less risky, which is to find someone that has built a team, right? And it doesn't have to be a perfect team. It doesn't have to be at your price point. It may, and this is aggressive, it may not even be perfectly in SaaS, but if she's an amazing manager, you need someone to build the team for you, not hire 1 or 2 reps, to hire 10 or 12. So the real risk is if someone can't hire anybody, right? That's the real risk you end up having. And the more your SMB, the more your transactional and low end and low price point, the more it's just about process than it is about building great field sales. So find someone that's built a team that is process oriented if your product's $99 a month. That's the best hack.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned hire. It's a very, very good challenge here in Brazil also. And I was reading a recent post of yours about the 10 pieces of advice you'd give to your younger self. And number 9 just hit me because you said diversity wins. Because it's just tempting to try to replicate your best sales reps, especially in the beginning. So what's the power of diversity into a sales team and how should we promote it? Yeah,
I meant a lot of things about diversity in the broadest sense, but you're exactly right. So let's step back in a minute. one of the biggest, I'm literally just chatting through this with a couple companies that work out of the SaaS or co-selling space that are doing well, but they only have one rep and they don't know why they're doing well. It might be the rep, or it might be that the CEO is still basically a salesperson, right? Or it might be that the entire company is helping her, right? So you've got to hire, capital aside, you've got to hire 2 or 3 different types of reps, especially in the beginning, because you don't know, right? And it's not only that it's not so much that you don't know what works for your product, you don't know what works for your skills as a manager. You have to hire reps that are complementary to your skill. The only one thing that's super important for your first few reps is that they're product smart. When you hire rep number 10, you can hire a cookie cutter rep as long as they have a good boss. You can hire all different types of reps. But what you need in the beginning is a high IQ rep, because things are going to get thrown at you. They have to be agile. They don't even have to be the world's best closer. They just have to be a decent closer. But they have to be someone that is so fluent in the product that you yourself as CEO would buy from. So find 3 different types of reps. Find someone from your industry, from a recruiting industry, from office supply industry, but someone that you would buy from with different backgrounds, and split your leads in 2 or 3. Split your leads in 2 or 3 and see what happens.
It seems perfect. I was talking to several entrepreneurs, and it just seemed tempting in the beginning, especially because you want to be consistent and deliver your first goal, your first customers. And as I talk to them, it seems so important diversity, because they move the bar, the company record every now and then, and that becomes the new bar. So it's fine to have a lone wolf, a team player, all these kinds of mixes in your first sales team, right?
Yes. You absolutely, you just want folks that you would buy from. The number one mistake that people make in the first few reps is they get lured in by a great LinkedIn. They get lured in by the fact that she worked at Dropbox. They get lured in by this or that. Like, that's a great way to get excited about a hire, but you have to you have to stop yourself before you make the offer, and you have to ask yourself an honest question. Would you buy from this person? And all the CEOs I talk to, the early-ish stage SaaS CEOs, and they tell me that this rep didn't work out, and this rep crashed and burned, and this rep, why did this rep fail? I always ask the one question: would you have bought from her? And you know what the answer always is? No. I wouldn't, but she was such a great salesperson. She was so eloquent. She knew all the acronyms and the buzzwords, and she worked at Salesforce. I don't care. Would you buy from her? Now, what will change is when you hire a real VP of sales, he or she will know how to work with an even broader group of salespeople, folks that you wouldn't buy from. That's one area where diversity will come in. It's not quite what I meant by diversity in that post, but it's still true. Rep number 11 does not have to be someone you would buy from. Not remotely. If you're going to make that bar stand from reps 11 through 100, you'll never scale, right?
Yeah, right.
But a great VP of sales will put process checks, SLAs in place, training in place, all these things, and we'll find a way to make an engine. You can't build an engine in the early days. You have to build on trust. So again, I know it sounds like a broken record, but this is the number one way you can not screw up sales reps in the beginning. You have to feel comfortable buying from them. If not, suck it up, struggle, and go and wait a month and go find someone you would buy from.
It makes perfect sense, because in the beginning you have so much chaos involving your product is not okay. It's not just even fine to show to others. So we were talking about this journey, right? SaaS is a long journey. And as you said yourself, it takes at least 24-month commitment to see if we hit something, and about 7 or 10 years total. If you were a founder again and live it, and if you could give us one advice to go through all these years, what would it be?
It's easy. That's the easiest answer I can give you. Slow down and make sure you have the right founding team.
Yeah.
Now let me step through this. There are a couple compromises you might make. You might have a co-founder that's just not technically strong enough. Okay, that's an issue, right? You might have a co-founder whose skills are not complementary to you. You can't both be great salespeople, right? And you can't both write code and not talk with customers. I mean, you need complementary skills. But usually, if you're a good founder, you'll figure that out, right? You'll realize I need a better coder than me, a better salesperson. That you'll figure out those sets of issues. The compromise that many of us make is we have a co-founder that isn't willing to go 7 to 10 years.
Makes sense.
And I didn't make that mistake in my first startup, and I did make it the second time. And I've had two pretty good exits, decent exits, but I would have had $1 billion plus exit if I had founders the first time that was committed as I was. No, because I had everything else going for me. I had the logos, I had the revenue, I had the growth, I had all the initial traction, but I didn't have founders that wanted to do this for 7 to 10 years. And I wasn't a good enough CEO to carry the burden on my own. Now, I pulled out of that tailspin by hiring a great VP of sales, great VP of marketing, and great VP of product, all three of whom were super committed, right? And if I hadn't done that, I would have gone bankrupt. I would have failed. And many of those folks I still work closely with to this day, even though we sold 6 years ago. I still work with them in different capacities. But the gap was between that, it was too long, right? I had 2 years where I was on my own without a true co-founder. And that time I could never get back, not just revenue, but the mental stress I had. So I was the first time I did a startup, I actually took my time. I waited as long as I could before we hit go. But the second time I lost patience. And the second I was ready to go, I said, boom, let's go. We're going to do this tomorrow. Like, I'm all ready to go. I got the team. We got the this. We got the that. And I should have slowed it down 3 to 4 months. It wouldn't have mattered, right? 3 to 4 months can wreck you later, but they just don't matter in the beginning, right? It's better to get the team aligned and have those tough conversations and say, look, who's not in this for 7 to 10 years? And if everyone doesn't raise their hand, I know it's horrible and it's hard, but you're better off finding another co-founder that is committed for 7 to 10 years. That I can boil it all down to that. And the startups I work with now, the ones that truly accelerate after that midpoint, that 4 to 5 million in revenue, the ones that are the ones that have these super committed teams. It doesn't mean every co-founder is actually going to be in the same role in 10 years, right? That's rare, right? But if you don't believe it together in the beginning, you'll never build a unicorn. It's just too hard. So I know it's hard, but take a pause in the beginning, and if you can, align the founders on going long.
And you need a lot of consistent along the way, right? I see companies here in Brazil starting projects, stopping projects, people changing jobs. And maybe because we are freaking millennials and impatient people, I don't know, but it seems that we need so much consistent, and it's so difficult along these years. And I'm so happy at Meetime that you said these words, and our founders, the first 5 or 6 people, are just so committed to the business that I see this way, you know?
It is. I mean, we all want that every startup to explode from day one. But, you know, when you look through a lot of the stories, even the ones that exploded didn't explode on day one. If you look at Slack's the fastest from 1 to 100 of all time, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
Slack, the company, whatever it was called before as a gaming company, it took them like 3 years to get there. It took them like 3 years to get to $1 in revenue. That was not an overnight success story, was it?
No, it wasn't.
And I look on SaaS, I look at a lot of great companies I've worked with. I've looked at companies like Algolia, Search as a Service, TalkDesk, Call Center, Pipedrive, lots of others. And they got started slowly. I mean, Algolia, which is becoming a de facto standard for doing search for applications, they started off as a mobile SDK, and it took them 2 years to get to the product that had revenue. And these are amazing founders, but most founders would have quit, right? And they weren't 20 years old. They had, you know, they'd already had careers, they had families, and they had to go through 2 years to get to any revenue and then go through YC and tilt their whole business model. It took them 2 years to become a pre-rocket ship, right? TalkDesk, you know, was the fastest growing company I invested in, Portuguese, not Brazilian, from 1 to 10 million. But Tiago went through 2 years with zero revenue after he won this Trilio hackathon, 0 years. So I know it's hard, but don't be discouraged by that. Everyone feels like this B2C mentality where they want to do Instagram or Slack or whatever, but go back, almost none of these companies were overnight success stories.
Yeah, they weren't. I was listening.
Almost none of them were, right? I mean, the newest, hottest SaaS companies, I mean, Zoom's always been great, but Zoom is one of the fastest growing companies after 100 million. And listen to our session with Eric Wan last year. I mean, no one would fund him. And he was VP of engineering at WebEx. And everyone said, no one needs this product. No one needs another WebEx. The market's going for free. You're dumb. You have no co-founder. And it took him 2 years to make this vision happen. And it's just, you think you're going to have an easier time than Slack or Zoom or Intercom? It ain't going to happen.
Yeah. I was listening to Reid Hoffman's podcast telling the Slack story, and they struggled a lot for years. And then
for years, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, I did the next question. I did the same question for Aaron Ross, and I want your perspective on it. Even with an A team, with happy customers and a great product, sometimes you will miss a quarter, and you can feel it in your stomach that it's going to happen. So how should a sales VP should behave in front of her team or her goal?
When the sales VP is going to miss a quarter?
Yeah.
The most important, there's a couple things.
Yes.
Of course it's going to happen, right? Now, and let's bear in mind what you want to do a couple things. You want to be dispassionate about it, take responsibility, and identify it early in a dispassionate way. What I see failing VP of sales do when it's a rough quarter is they do one of two things or both. One, they don't tell you until the quarter's over, right? That's not cool. That's okay for what I call a soft miss, right? Let's step back. There's a difference between a soft and a hard miss. A soft miss is you still did better than last quarter. It's just you missed the plan, right?
Yeah.
The SaaS companies want to grow. So I added 100,000 in revenue last quarter. The goal was 200 this quarter, and I did 120. Okay. Well, that's a big miss quantitatively, but you still did better than last quarter, right? It means the engine's sort of working. That's a soft miss. It's okay to not be sure about a soft miss until the last day of the quarter. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But a hard miss. We did 100 last quarter, and we're doing 50 this quarter. If you can't raise your hand early, you're incompetent, right? That is a disaster, and it may happen. So what are the not great VP of sales do? They don't tell you until after the quarter ends, and they blame somebody else. Right? What I see the other folks doing is hustling. They tell you, listen, this is going to be a rough quarter, and it's my fault, right? I should have done better. But here are the 10 things we're doing. We're going to do 10 more calls a day. We're going to get on a plane and go visit this customer that we wouldn't have visited instead, right? We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're not going home. We're doing this. And they do these, they step it up, and they don't blame anybody else. The most VP sales that aren't going to make it, they blame product, right? They say, you know what?
Yeah, right.
I missed this quarter because the product sucked. But is the product worse than it was last quarter? Of course not. Right? And for all of dawn eternity, until you're at $1 billion in revenue, you will lose deals due to product gap. Slack's business model today has higher churn in the enterprise than in SMBs. You know why? It's still feature poor.
Yeah.
If Slack is feature poor in the enterprise, what about you? And so these VP of sales, they start blaming product, and then you know who else they blame? Marketing. They didn't give me enough leads, right?
Happens a lot.
You know what? If you had a great VP of marketing last quarter and you have no VP of marketing this quarter, that's a fair excuse, right? But you cannot blame other people, even if it's true. And the worst one is when they blame the competition. Because of course it's true, right? Of course competition gets better, right? But you have to get better. Everyone has to get good at competing. So when they blame competition, product, or marketing, they can vent to you as CEO quietly, right? Quietly, you have to let your VP of sales vent. You have to let her blame marketing, sales, or product. You have to let them blow off some steam. But if they do it publicly, you need to find a replacement.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You can't do it publicly. That means best case, they've lost their confidence. And here's the thing. Even a good VP of sales in a different context, when you see they've lost confidence in their eyes, when they don't believe, it's over. They never get that confidence back. The good ones will miss a quarter, but they don't lose the confidence. They just lose a little bit of moxie, but moxie and confidence are not the same. When that fire goes out of their eyes, it never goes back.
Makes sense. I read this post when you explained the hard miss and the soft miss concept, and it clears your mind in how you should behave on both.
Yes.
Yes, it's good. So, Jason, as we reach the end of this episode, I would like you to comment a little bit about your event, SaaStr Annual 2018, that will take place in San Francisco. What should we expect from it?
Craziness. So, I started doing meetups 4 years ago, and I never would have expected 10,000 people in 2018 would come from almost every country on the planet to San Francisco.
Wow.
But you should come. But let's talk about for a minute why, because I've learned if you're coming from Brazil, we'll have all the great unicorns, right? We'll have the CEOs of Atlassian and Coupa and I think Slack and all of them, right? We'll have tons of them, and we'll have all the up and comers, right? We'll have great teams from the Intercoms and the Algolias and the Mixmaxes and the next generations that are doing whatever, 20 to 50 to 80 million. And we'll have all of them. All the VCs will be there, right? Every VC in B2B. And that's great. And you should come for all of that. But the real reason to come is because it's the greatest time to meet other people. It's the biggest time in the world when other CEOs and folks, even other CEOs from Brazil, they'll all be there, right? And I can't believe how many folks from Europe, for example, say, I've got to go all the way to San Francisco and SaaStr Annual to meet all the other European founders and VCs. But everyone's being there. So even though we have the best content in the industry, and we'll have great new stuff this year, we'll have mentorships and training and birds of a feather and all this stuff to help you to do this. The real goal is not more content, it's to meet more people. We want you to meet as many other great CEOs like you or a stage later as possible, and we're going to do everything we can to do it. And that's why it's worth the time, right? Because San Francisco is the center of SaaS, at least for the foreseeable future. So this is your 1 week when every partner, every customer, every peer will be there. So do it. That's my learning. And I don't know when this podcast goes live. When will it go live?
It will go live next week.
Okay. So at least until then, I use this code Jason30 if you can until it expires. They don't give me access to this stuff anymore because I go crazy with it. But go to SaaStrAnnual.com and use Jason30. It's the best deal you can get now. But come because what we talked about. SaaS takes a while, right? This is your one chance a year. I know it's not cheap. Forget about the tickets. Don't even matter. You got to fly here. You got to budget the time. You got to stay in a hotel, right? It's the fully burdened cost going anywhere is high. The ticket, $600 for a ticket doesn't matter, does it? It's going to cost you like $4,000 to get here, isn't it?
Yeah.
With all the soft costs.
Yeah.
But this is your one. There's nothing bigger this year where you could have an impact on your business. So if it feels like something you should do, like don't wait a year, do it. If it doesn't feel like something you should do, don't come this year. Come next year. Right. We're gonna sell out all the tickets soon. We don't have room for everybody. So don't come if you don't want to come. But this is your one chance a year to do all of this. And the other thing is if you have customers and partners in the Bay Area, go meet them.
Yeah, fantastic.
Right. Don't come just for the event. Because you got to visit your customers. Right? You got to visit them. So instead of picking a random week to schlep to the Bay Area, pick the rainiest, coldest day of the week of the year in San Francisco, the first week of February, and come for the event, the networking, and go meet your customers and partners, and go visit Salesforce and Twilio and TalkDesk and Algolia or whoever. Go meet them, and then fly back, and then tell me if it wasn't ROI positive.
Yeah, our partners here at Meetime were at SaaStr 17th. We were like 80 Brazilians. So we visited a lot of companies, and one of the most fantastic experiences we had. And we will be at SaaStr next year also. Have the chance to thank you for this podcast in person. But for now, Jason, thanks a lot for saving this time to talk with us. I was very excited, and I am excited about the result of this podcast. I'll let you know when it goes live. So again, thanks a lot.
Great, and we'll promote it on our side. Thanks for all the time, man. Talk to you soon and see you in February.
Yeah. Bye-bye.